And we are live, broadcasting from the mud flaps and neck tattoo capital of the world. Welcome to the Sunday MMA show. Glad to see everybody here. Let me know in the comments if we have proper sound, and there won't be much video today, just a few photos to bring up. But yeah, let me know if the sound's all right. Shout out to Kiwi TV. Yeah, brother. Don't be sorry for telling the truth, all right? Mr. Remix says, hey. I'm assuming we've got volume. Last time there was a little snafu where I didn't get the volume quite there, so let me know it's there. Anyway, wow, what a good fight card, especially for a fight night. Makhachev versus Bobby Green, but the whole card really delivered. Pretty much even the fights we thought were going to be good ended up being pretty good or even better. And even the ones that I was expecting to sort of plod through ended up delivering. There were a lot of, as the fight night cards have been recently, there were a lot of, can't even call them contenders or prospects necessarily, but these tweener fighters that are young, have pretty well-rounded skill sets, and are coming into the UFC looking to make a name for themselves. We definitely saw that with Brahimaz, Jonathan Martin, Terence Mckenney, and from the ladies' side, Josiani Nunez. She looked great. She looked great in her previous performance as well, and we'll get into all of those. Ignacio Bahamandes. This is a guy who I thought, of all the people in the recent seasons of the Contender Series, has a little something extra. Although he did seem to be lacking the killer instinct or the mean streak in his fight against Rong Zhu, he brought that mean streak. He brought the killer instinct as well, so we'll talk about that. Armin Petrosian versus Gregory Rodriguez, another great fight. Pretty much everything on the main card delivered. Armin Cerukian against Joe Alvarez, another great fight. Cerukian really trying to stamp himself as a legit contender. He's been a prospect for a while already, ranked 13th. Put on an amazing display of his prowess. And it's not easy to get that kind of ground and pound and not lose control of the guy, especially with a bit of a squirmy fellow like Alvarez, who I still am anxious to see fight in the future. The one fight on the main card that I was a little suspect about because of the overall records, they both came in with losing records, was Kim versus Cachoeira. And Priscilla, true to her name, she's the zombie girl. She eschews all technique, gets angry, and basically everything short of a spaz out in the third round, bringing some excitement to a fight that was not overly technical, particularly on Cachoeira's side, and made the fight exciting. And Kim, she showed real good heart. It's not like either of these ladies are going to be burning up the rankings anytime soon. So to me, it's an added bonus when fighters like that can deliver, which sort of tells you or reaffirms the idea that when you give somebody an opportunity, you never know what they'll make of it. But tonight was all about, or last night rather, was all about Islam Makhachev versus Bobby Green. What this means for the lightweight division. How good is Islam? Yes, he's getting another opponent who's not in the top 20, top 15. Yeah, he's getting another opponent who's coming off a pretty hard-fought fight. Yes, he's getting another opponent who all the cards are stacked against him, but all of that said, in recent fights, particularly in the last 4 fights, when Makhachev gets in there, he dominates. Now, that's not the only thing to consider, and we'll get into all of this, and I'm looking forward to hearing your input as well. But from my perspective, when you're a minus 850 favorite, you can't just lay on a guy. You can't just, if you're a striker, you can't outpoint and avoid the actual fight. And what we're seeing from Islam is a real blending of his older style, which involves footwork, working behind the jab, getting the striking going, his high kicks. He has quite good high kicks, often understated, because he gets the comparison with Khabib, and Khabib never, even though he was effective with his striking, speaking of Khabib, he never looked good. It always looked awkward. It always looked amateurish. Where Islam, you can see that in the pressure of the moment, if he gets into a little bit of a tete-a-tete, he's going to still maintain his discipline and technique with the strikes for the most part. And though we didn't have to see much striking from Islam, he wasn't out of sorts in the few exchanges before the fight went to the canvas. And I've got a few thoughts about who he might fight next as well. Let me know in the comments section what you think should be next for Islam Makhachev. He gets the win, 323 TKO in the first round. He's now got 10 wins in a row. And no, he doesn't have the biggest names. And for much of his career, he wasn't getting finishes, but he is getting finishes. He seems to be coming into his own, and he definitely needs a challenge. The question seems to be, does he get a championship? Is he getting Charles Oliveira next? Or if he doesn't get that, then who should he get? And again, let me know some of your thoughts down below. I think the obvious and the easiest thing to do with Makhachev would be to bring in the original fight he was supposed to have, which was Beneil Dariush. And I talked about that matchup a little bit during the last live stream. And at first I didn't like the matchup because I thought it was the least dynamic guy in the top 10 that Makhachev could have faced. And so much of the criticism against Makhachev and Team Khabib in general is that they never fight wrestlers and they never fight the most dynamic guys if they don't have to. And I've quoted Uncle Chael Sonnen many times and said, look, it's prize fighting and you want to fight the easiest opponent for the most amount of gain. So I'm not going to hate on Makhachev for the matchmaking, particularly in the last few since his original opponent fell out. He should have never been matched up against Dos Anjos. That was an embarrassing matchup for him at that stage. Getting Dan Hooker gives him the one top 10 fighter on his resume. Yes, it was in awkward circumstances, and yes, Hooker isn't the best against wrestlers, but we have to go back to what did the performance actually look like. And at the end of the day, Makhachev got the job done, and he did it with style points as he did against Bobby Green. Here we go. I guess as long as we're talking about that. There we go. So, with Islam in this fight, he came out, he was comfortable. And this is where the comparisons to Khabib really don't work. Khabib was always moving away, kind of scurrying early in the stages in his fights, looking for the opportunity because he didn't want to take the risk and wasn't comfortable, especially when both men were fresh, just giving his opponent an opportunity to set up combinations or striking in general. Where Islam, you can see, is much more comfortable, as many of the Dagestanis are. You know, really, Khabib is the only one who didn't have a pretty good pedigree, maybe not pedigree, but pretty good effective strikes, particularly kicks. I don't know what they're doing over there to develop the wrestling as well as they have, and the kicking game that so many of these guys have, but they're definitely getting it done. Now, I did think towards the end of the fight, which it wasn't very long, there was and I'm not sure how much people have talked about this. Let's see if I can find it. There was the fence grab, and this is just from a screen grab on my computer, so it's not the greatest image of all time. But there was a moment when Green was wobbling back and forth, going from his hip to his back, trying to unseat Makhachev, and he starts to unseat him, and Makhachev reaches up and fully grabs the fence. In fact, as he's starting to sort of rock out of position, you can see the whole fence move. Now, this is nitpicking, because I think it would have ended this way regardless, but I would like to see, from a rule standpoint, you know, if somebody's being taken down and they stop the takedown by grabbing the fence, pretty much all the good refs will stop the fight and give the position. Or at least recently, that's been more common. And to me, when you have somebody in such a dominating position, if you then grab the fence, it multiplies the effect that much more. So I would have liked to have seen Herb Dean. It's early in the fight. The guy didn't have to. Now, I'm sure it was just instinct. In no way did Islam look like he was trying to cheat or do anything other than, in the moment, he grabbed the fence, which is the natural instinct any of us would do. And even later in this position, when Islam needs to balance, he closes his left fist and pushes that up against the fence, which is perfectly legal. So you could tell that the first fence grab was a mistake, but undeniably it gave a huge advantage to Islam. So that would be the one, really the only negative from Islam in the whole fight. And again, that's, you could almost call it incidental, but I have an issue that so many of the rules in MMA go back to the idea, well, was it intentional or was it incidental? Well, no other sport has that. If you foul a guy in basketball or football or whatever, if you do the thing, it's a penalty. And I think it's a lot easier to assess a penalty if you're only changing the position. To me, that would be the point that refs should be looking at, should be pushed to think about. That you're not taking away a point from Islam, you would only be taking away the position. And to me, that'd be perfectly fair. And then we would have seen more of the fight. The other issue would be perhaps the fight was stopped a little soon. I certainly saw some people saying that. Again, there was a feeling of inevitability that Green just really didn't have any way to effectively. It's not so much that he couldn't stop the takedown. It was that he couldn't stop that complete boa constrictor, like sliding up his body and sliding into the next position. He couldn't. Islam is even faster and seems to be getting better than even Khabib was at that. I guess that's the advantage of being able to train with Khabib and learn from him. He should be better at it. That's a tribute to what Khabib's done. So sure, Bobby could have stayed down there longer, but I'm not even sure he could have gotten out of that position. And even if he had, he might have stopped a few takedowns. But it really did seem inevitable that Islam was going to get around and bring the pain. Germ Indigent says it sounds great. Good. Puno Glava says, Galvac rather says, hey bro, will you start making videos again? Yes. I will be making a video this week. I've already started it about Covington and Jorge Masvidal, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the show. And I plan on going about 90 minutes. I try to keep it a little bit shorter and sweeter. We'll see how things roll. And this will be a regular occurrence now. I'll finally got a spot, setting up a little bit of a studio. I'm in an actual spot. I'm not in the middle of the woods right now. So definitely will be some consistency going on around here. So consider this live stream the first of a streak. Crumley says Islam is freaking massive for 155. No one at 155 can beat him outside of Kamaru. The top wrestlers like Colby, I don't think the welterweights can beat him. I think that's a fair point. Now, I will say that the one fighter that I would say that I would favor against Islam, I think there are other fighters who could win, but the one fighter I would definitely favor, even if just slightly, is Charles Oliveira. Because even the way Islam got his head in against Bobby Green in last night's fight, you do that against Charles Oliveira, it's over. You're not getting out of it. And Oliveira has very good striking. More as far as damage and affecting the fight, he has more effective striking than even Bobby Green has. So much of what Green is able to do is shoulder roll, footwork, avoid damage, things like that. In fact, I was thinking how much Bobby Green at this point of his career reminds me of Jorge Masvidal. If you remember, Mozvidal at 155, he would have all these fights, including his fight against Ally Quinta, where he looked like he was in control. The fans thought he won, but if you're really watching the fight, he just wasn't scoring as many points. He was almost more worried about looking like a proper boxer, or looking classier, looking more just showing up the other fighter with your skill. And how many split decisions and close decisions did Jorge lose? And we saw the same thing, we've seen the same thing with Bobby Green. In that way, I thought maybe this wasn't the best matchup for him, because he's not a guy that really wins by points anyways. And though Makhachev, certainly there should be some questions about his chin, since his one loss was to, I'm trying to remember now, Adriano Martins? Yeah. And that was by knockout. And it wasn't a crazy shot, and it put him down. But he was also much more offensive-minded with striking in those days and left himself open. We haven't seen that Makhachev since then. And he got very careful for a long time, and now he's starting to be more dynamic with his grappling. So, good to see Green get a payday, and it definitely looked a little bit like Green was definitely there, almost the way we saw Kevin Holland when he was on his streak. He where he was fighting all the time. It was almost that he realized that if I come in and people want to see me, and I'm sort of doing the UFC a favor, I'm going to get these good paydays. If I lose, it's probably be because I got held down, and who cares? I'm getting paid for this, and I'll come back in 2 more months, 3 months, and do it again. And if I can keep it on the feet, I'll put on a show. There was a little bit of a feel to me about Bobby Green that way in this fight. All right. Justin Krishenk says, please make more videos. Yeah, definitely. I'm excited for that. Omar D says, why aren't fighters in the top 10 calling out Islam? Well, he's a problem. And if you're going to beat him, you know you're going to have to fight from the bottom. It's a ugly style to fight against. Even at this point, he has very little name recognition. He's not going to give you a big boost. There were just easier guys to fight for bigger rewards. Now that he's ranked 4th, and I don't see that he could really move any higher, even with the win against Bobby Green, there's a little more reward to it. But apparently, Bobby Green wasn't the first guy to get called, and we can wonder who those other guys were. I can only imagine. I wouldn't think it was anybody. Maybe Diego Fiera. I'm thinking of guys in the top 10, top 15 that might have been called. Pretty much every. I don't think the UFC is going to call Michael Chandler last minute to save a fight night. Dos Anjos already has a fight. Tony Ferguson isn't going to take that fight on short notice. Obviously, McGregor, Fiziev, he's already booked up. So they would have been reaching outside of the top 15, top 20 anyways. So to me, it really doesn't matter who else they called, because it wasn't going to be a contender that turned it down anyway. Although, too bad for whoever it was, because you're going to get some name recognition being in a main event, and you're showing the UFC that you're willing to jump in there. So, it's all good, man. With much less content, do I still watch MMA regularly? Yeah, I've watched every fight, take just as many notes, do almost as much work, but it's the back end, the production. I just hadn't had, for a long time, I had too many other things on my plate. I just couldn't put in the extra 40, 60 hours in a week to crank out videos. But that is changing. Angel Silva says, Islam definitely did not want to stand up with Green. No, but in the moments early in the fight when he was standing, he wasn't panicked, and he wasn't jittery the way, say, a Khabib or your typical wrestle-only guy, although there's not too many wrestle-only guys left in the UFC. Killa Jam says, do you think Islam deserves a title shot? If you're talking generally, does his resume put him in a place to be the number one contender? I would say no. Through some of his own choices and some things he couldn't control, he just has virtually nobody on his resume. What's been more impressive is over the last 4 fights, he's taken those nobodies and he's dispatched them with haste and prejudice, and it's been impressive. But how many impressive wins against the number 26 ranked guy or 30th ranked guy do you have to string along to equal a good victory over somebody in the top 10? I don't know. That's one of the things we struggle with, to try to figure out just how good Islam is. I'll drop my big, and let me know what you guys think. I will be opening up the phones later in the show before we wrap this thing up, and so think about questions you might want to ask. It can be whatever topic you want, but if you have the next fight for Makhachev, IMAC as I call him, if you've got IMAC's next fight, let me know who it is and have a good argument for why it should be that person, whether it's Oliveira in the championship, or if you think Islam should just sit out, and somebody else gets the championship in the interim, let me know. The fighters that I was thinking, I think it's a fairly short list. I think you give him Beneil Dariush. I think that makes the most sense. Beneil can certainly hang in the pocket. He's actually not quite as technical, and I hate that term. Hopefully we're going to rid the MMA space of people just talking about how technical a guy is after the Ngannou-Gane fight. Because I just don't want to hear it anymore. Somebody's going to win because they're more technical. That doesn't mean anything. It's not that it doesn't mean anything. It's just one factor. But that doesn't mean that it's not a category. And by technical, I mean proficient and efficient with their strikes. I don't care if they look like the textbook. Think about the shot that Khabib landed on McGregor, knocked him on his ass. That was the least technical strike you can throw, but he knocked the dude down with it. And his knockout of Shalrus in his debut, Khabib's one knockout, it was a very similar type punch. Half the time, those crazy-ass punches coming out of nowhere from some wild angle are going to have more effect, especially if you're not primarily a striker. So I like the matchup with Makhachev and Beneil Dariush. You're never going to question Benny's heart. And I just couldn't imagine Makhachev just knifing through Benny's guard the way he has Dan Hooker and Bobby Green of late. And then in the stand-up, I think Beneil's got a better chin. And he does like to mix it up. I mean, he didn't in the Tony Ferguson fight, but that makes sense. I'm not going to hate on a guy who fights one safe fight in his career. Most of Beneil's fights have been pretty wide open. And don't forget, he was the one who was on the march, getting talked about in the top 10, and ended up getting knocked out by Hernandez in his debut on a short notice fight. So Alex Hernandez. So it's actually good to see Beneil Dariush have a little more forward thinking about his career. You can't just live in the moment in the cage. You have to use some amount of foresight and planning as well. So to answer the question more succinctly, do I think Islam deserves a title shot? I'm going to say no, because I think anyone who gets a title shot should have to fight a top contender first. It doesn't mean that you have to fight the number one contender or even 2 or 3 or 4, but somebody who's been a legit contender or is a legit contender, the way Colby Covington got his rematch against Usman by fighting Tyron Woodley. You don't have to fight 2, 3, 4 more guys if you wreck the guy who had been the champ for years. So if we could see Islam in there against, a Poirier, if you could get him in there, I think the most interesting fight would be Justin Gaethje, but they're basically under the same management, so I don't know that we're going to see that anytime soon. I think Michael Chandler would take it, but my number one pick, and this is the more I've been thinking about it, the guy that Islam Makhachev should fight next is Gregor Gillespie. The guy doesn't have a fight. Speaking of Gillespie, he's a legitimate wrestler. He would be the best wrestler that either Khabib or Islam have ever fought. Neither guy ever fought a wrestler. They fought a couple Brazilians who liked to wrestle, but clearly that's not the same thing. Gillespie also has heart and cardio that would allow him to push through, I believe, the bad spots, the spots where other people sort of give in. You're not going to see Gillespie give in, particularly after his last fight. Yeah, what was his last fight? Yes, against Diego Ferreira. That was a crazy fight, if you all remember it, where Ferreira it was all one-way traffic, and the ref was even thinking about stopping it at the end of the first round. Gillespie got up, and he could barely, he was not in complete physical control of his body. Comes out, and his heart and cardio push through, ends up getting the TKO. His one loss in the UFC is to Kevin Lee with a damn sneaky left high kick. And Kevin Lee can knock anybody out with that. If he was able to set traps for that, he might still be in the UFC, because there's no tell to that kick. It's fast. It's almost as fast as Jonathan Martin's high kick that we saw earlier in the night. What do we have here? Sirach Jones says, Alpaca, how many fights do you think John Jones will actually have at heavyweight? Well, the only thing I've heard recently over the last month or so is that it's looking like maybe Stipe. And I think Stipe is about the only guy John really wants to fight. Although he might go in against Derek Lewis, because Lewis's soft spots are so well known. John would be able to game plan for that and really give the Black Beast a tough time, and that'd be big name recognition. Those are all things short of the title fight. I'll say it again, and I've been saying it for years. John's never going to fight Francis Ngannou. Not until he sees somebody actually dominate Francis in a way that John thinks he could replicate. And that doesn't mean to say that I think John's afraid of Francis per se. It's just, I believe it's a bit of a mental block, that if he can't see or imagine or game plan how to approach somebody, and the cost of making any mistake is annihilation and obliteration of your legacy, if John's thinking that way, then why fight him? I think John was starting to talk about getting into the heavyweight division and coming back and having fights. That was when everybody was getting on the Gone train, thinking, oh, well, this guy's technical, and Francis isn't technical. Well, we know Francis has heart. We know he has grit. We know he has a tremendous will to win. We never saw those things from Gone. It doesn't mean he doesn't have him. It doesn't mean he doesn't have those traits. But just looking better in a sparring room or in matches where it's all one-way traffic and you can control the distance and the position, you're not getting an accurate view of how somebody's going to fight when it becomes a bit of a dogfight, when it becomes two dudes who aren't wrestlers wrestling for the heavyweight championship of the UFC. So I definitely don't see John coming back against Francis. I think he looks at a fight versus Stipe much the way Adesanya looked at fighting Jan Blachowicz. The guy is not super fast. He has power, but limited footwork, limited offensive weapons, and has plenty of defensive liabilities. I think Izzy believed he could go in there and pick him apart, maybe not get a finish, but you don't need to get a finish if you're Izzy. You just get up there and you get your decision. So I think John's looking at Stipe much that way, that he'd be able to outclass him in enough areas to be able to win it. But at this point, even though Stipe's, I'm going to call him the second greatest heavyweight in UFC history, to me you have to call Francis Ngannou the greatest. He has the best resume. So even though Stipe has a great legacy, the dude's not getting any younger. Okay. Yes, Trendkill says we need consistency. I hear you, brother. You're not wrong. That's my complete objective. So don't feel bad for saying those things. It's absolutely right. And Trendkill says, good to see me, though, at a decent time for those in England. Yeah, well, that's the intention of the Sunday shows. And moving forward, they will start at 11 a.m. West Coast time, so that puts it, I believe, 7 p.m. London time. So I'm just trying to make it more wide open so more people can join in. Sean V says, I need to up the energy. Sounds like a fall asleep meditation track. Yeah, probably as I do more of these. The main thing will be the videos. Now that I'm finally in a spot where I can do all of that and have a few of the things off the plate that had been there for a long time, the main thing will always be the videos and the breakdowns, because I can go much deeper and do the work. Doing the live show, it's mostly about interactions and thinking about questions in the moment. So, if you haven't noticed, I'm kind of a contemplative dude. The quick, quippy one-liners and whatnot, they work well on television, and Chael Sonnen's good at that. But to do that, you have to have pre-prepared ideas, or very simplistic ideas, where half the time you're hearing my thought process. And it's cool if that's a little boring to you. I think that's understandable, but this is pretty much who I am. So hopefully it'll grow on you, and you'll appreciate it, and we'll get this thing rolling forward with the consistency. And it'll also help when I'm able to put together more production value and some video and whatnot. And but I just wanted to get today's live stream up and going to test the new setup I have and where I'm at. So, okay. JDBB TV says Islam's going to lose to Charles. Yeah, I would probably put that at about minus 180, Oliveira. Maybe 160. But it could be, I think if it's a quick fight, it would be Charles piecing him up on the feet, getting a sub or getting a knockout early. The longer it goes, the more opportunity Makhachev has. I mean, the dude's got a shot. It's in my opinion. It's not like and that Oliveira is a slam dunk, though some of you will remember as soon as Oliveira won the belt, and people thought, well, he's just holding it for Islam, or he's just holding it for somebody. Gaethje was the big one. Well, I don't think that. I think Oliveira is going to go on a very long run. But one of the best, one of the most likely guys to unseat him, I think, would be Makhachev. But again, to me, IMAC needs one true victory against a real contender. Islam versus Chandler next, Justin Crookshank says. Yeah, I think that'd be interesting. It would still work well for Makhachev because draining a guy's cardio is what he does best. And, we see that from Chandler, but Chandler's going to have a puncher's chance. He should be able to avoid many of the positions, maybe stop some of the takedowns. And if he stops enough of the initial takedowns, that might put Islam in more of a striking mindset. And to me, this is the important point about Makhachev that I'm always questioning. We knew with Khabib that no matter what you did in there, he was always going to stay focused on getting you down, suffocating you, and tiring you out. Where I believe Makhachev wants to strike. Now, he's extremely disciplined, and he's been having so much dynamic success with the grappling. It's exciting, and it's building his name, and he's getting these early finishes. But if you get him into the second, third round, and he's standing up, he may just start focusing on the striking, trying to get back after being hit. Things like normal things, where that's one of the things that made Khabib so amazing was his singular focus. You were never going to throw Khabib off that train. He was the conductor. It was going straight down the track, and it was going to end up with him on top and you on your back. Where if you had a Chandler or even a Gregor Gillespie, who I think is a much more effective grappler and wrestler than Chandler is, and a little more disciplined with his defense in general in the striking department, I think that would be the matchup to really push Makhachev. But Gillespie, he'd rather be fishing than promote himself, so the guy has no name outside of the hardcores. Branchelis, I'm getting that wrong. B says, hey dude, great content, keep posting new videos, much respect, listen to you from Basra, Iraq. Thanks, brother. Antonio says, love to hear your voice in this effed up times, peace, love, and harmony. I hear you, brother. Amen. We can all be a little more thoughtful without being too passive either. Tom Aspinall will become UFC heavyweight champion. You heard it here first, says Trendkill. Yeah, Aspinall. That's going to be exciting, seeing Aspinall headlining the card. Was it March over in England? And that's a guy who's had a change of mindset. And hearing him, I think it was on Helwani's show, he really started to open up a little bit and said, look, I always wanted to take the slowest path possible because I'm young, but now I'm starting to see the value in pushing my career, in grabbing the brass ring, if you will. And I like that mentality a lot more than a guy who has too many reasons why he's not ready. It's a delicate balance. In fact, it goes back to a fight earlier on last night's card. It was the Rongzhu versus Ignacio Bahamandes. Rongzhu, to me, I hate seeing guys like this. He's got so much flash and potential. He's just 21 years old. He doesn't have anything close to his man strength. But he's in there against savages. And, he may be on the Chinese government supplemental plan, so he's getting all the supplements he needs. But that's no substitution for experience. And we saw this with Tom Duquesnoy back in several years ago now. But the French kid who was famous for doing the splits like Claude Van Damme, and he was from France, and he was really supposed to be potentially the next big thing. And then he ran into what I think it was the Korean Superboy, and got knocked out badly. And he had one other loss, and then he was done. And he didn't just get kicked out of the UFC. He retired. He never wants to fight anymore. And I hate to see that with some of these young guys, and Rongju being one of them. It's hard when you're the UFC and you want fighters from certain areas that are underrepresented but have big demographics. So it makes total sense. There aren't a ton of, for the size of the population, there aren't a ton of amazing Chinese fighters, but I would say go back 5, 6 years, 7 years, however long ago it was when they had the Chinese Ultimate Fighter. Those guys were horrible. Those are the worst fighters I've ever seen on a UFC platform. So to go from that to having Zhang Wei Li and the Leech, and there are several other guys that I'm forgetting their names, but Rongju, this guy could develop, but let him develop. He's being thrown to the wolves and fighting a guy with no more experience than he had in Bahamandes. But Ignacio, even just being 24, which still is extremely young, the dude has so much moxie, so much, you can tell the way he's trained, it works efficiently to transition to the actual fight, where I kind of think that Rongju, he had a lot of kickboxing and all these other things and was maybe fighting a lot of fights where it was almost more like an exhibition. And he expected his power to somehow be the difference. And fighting a guy in Bahamandes, I mean, he tested his chin a few times. And again, I said in the opening that I think Ignacio is a standout. He's a special fighter. And he just had way too much. And by the end of the fight, he was putting a tremendous amount of damage on Rong. So I get where Tom Aspinall is coming from early in his career, where he said he didn't want to go too fast, particularly in the heavyweight division, but you have to strike that balance. I'm excited to see how Aspinall does with his spotlight. Arl, good to see you, brother. I assume you're still in Vienna. I believe that's where you said you were at last time. He says, Islam has to fight a top 5 guy, end of story. Yeah, I've been saying it for 20 minutes, and he summed it up in one sentence. Good job. I completely agree. At the very least, it's got to be a true top 10 guy like Gregor Gillespie. But, yeah, make him fight somebody in the top 5. Next question. Earl also says, John will never fight at heavyweight. He would never risk the public humiliation of a Francis knockout. Yeah. And John puts himself in a very strange position. If he comes in and doesn't fight Francis first, well, that's a little strange, but you can sell it as he wants to see how his body feels at heavyweight. He's still going to fight a top 10 guy. John's not going to come in and fight a scrub. So if it's not Stipe, it'll be Volkov or maybe Derek Lewis, somebody like that. Maybe even Blades. You know, the guy's been out for a while, and John should be able to handle his wrestling, and the striking should be tremendous advantage. But say John comes in and he beats Stipe, then what? Then you have to fight Francis. He can't just nibble around the edges. My guess is that John, because he's gone pretty radio silent about what his next fight was since Francis won. He gave a little bit of chatter, but nothing specific, and then he's gone silent. My guess is he wants to see if he could maybe get into an interim situation, hoping that he fights Stipe maybe for the interim, and then comes back around and maybe Francis doesn't re-sign with UFC. It's not that I think John, in the front of his mind, is always thinking, "Oh, I don't want to fight Francis." I think it's an instinct. It's not where he's sitting around in a fetal position fearing Francis. I think it just doesn't fit on his radar. He can't shape it into a plan. So I agree. He's definitely doesn't want the kind of humiliation that would come to him if he were to fight Francis and Francis delivers a bomb. Brian Diff, I believe that's Brian, the motorcycle guy, says we need some deep dives. Yeah, definitely. He'll be deep diving into Colby and Jorge. I'm definitely going to cover their Tuesday. Apparently, ESPN's going to drop an interview where they're both in the same room with Stephen A. Smith. So I'll probably do a full breakdown of that. And I'm crazy excited about that. We can get to this now and maybe come back around and talk about some of the other fights. But the whole Jorge versus Colby deal, I'm not sure. I'm not sold that it's not manufactured. And I thought that at the time. Now, I don't think Colby, we know he's not a good actor. So it might be that Colby isn't fully in on it. I'm just wondering if Jorge, because if you remember, Mozvidal had a rough run, and then he came back, he sort of changed his approach, he went to 170, he got completely schooled by Stephen Thompson, and seemed to be set back. Then he went away and did that reality show, which I've never seen. I don't know if anybody's seen that. I can only imagine what kind of crazy show that would be. It was apparently partially reality show, partially competition. Anyway, but he was away from technology for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, really long time. And Jorge's talked about this. It totally changed his mindset. That you've got to risk it. That you need to be out there. You know, so much of Mosvidal's mindset comes from growing up in a tough situation, fighting on the street. Everything you do is a reflection on your honor, on your manhood. One screw up, you get knocked out, you're a punk forever. And that's how we saw a very guarded. I mean, look at the interviews. It's Old Testament, New Testament. Old Testament, game bred. He hated interviews. One-word answers. Nothing but a sort of a wry, not even a wry, but kind of a internal smirk and disdain, almost a sneer. He didn't want to do any. Now he's one of the best interviews. He's showing us his personality, but that takes a different form of courage that I believe took him a while to find in himself, and it seems like that's what he found. I wouldn't be completely surprised if, as Jorge was going through the fight with Diaz for the BMF and getting that knockout of Ben Askren, he was seeing that if you made a plan and you stuck with it and you played a little bit of a role, but you also opened yourself up and showed your personality, that you could have real success and you could get even more love from the fans and have a more real connection. I'm wondering if part of his plan was, look, it's unlikely I'm going to be able to win the welterweight title, even though he had 2 shots at it. He wasn't close in either one. And I think going into those fights, he didn't assume that he had any great chance. It's a horrible matchup, and quite honestly, Mozvidal is a 155er. At this stage of his career, it would be hard for him to go back to that weight, but he doesn't have the frame to compete against the big wrestlers they have at welterweight. So to use his new exposed personality and his charisma that he clearly has, it almost makes sense to me that he would create a rift with Colby and play it up, whether or not Colby's in on it. Because, again, Colby's not a great actor. So I'm wondering if that's part of it. It's one of the reasons I'm really anticipating seeing this first interview where the two of them are interacting. Because I think we'll be able to see if there's something going on there. Definitely if they're both in on it. But I'm thinking if there is any sort of a fake news aspect to their beef, it's most likely that it's only on Jorge's side, that he played it against Colby, because they share so many things in common, and not just their history, but they have a lot of the same values. And so it makes sense. They both get big paydays. They're headlining a pay-per-view. It's not for a belt. Nobody's even suggesting it's for a belt. They both have 2 losses to the champ. Even though Colby is firmly ensconced as the number 1 contender, he's not going to get the next shot at Usman, even if he, is incredible against Mozvidal. So if they did, or just Jorge came up with a plan to create some beef against the guy everybody hated, it'll be interesting to see, and I think we will see some of that. Okay. Evil Business, good to see you too. Chaco says he feels Khabib and Hazmat prefer damage over position, while Islam prefers positioning. Yeah, well, definitely Khabib was all about position. Khabib didn't do damage or even get submissions until he had guys extremely tired, until the last couple fights. Go back to the McGregor fight. Khabib did 0 damage to Conor when he was on the mat, because he was so concerned about losing position. That's the whole reason that Khabib came up with the shtick. I mean, this is a psychological thing. The whole reason Khabib came up with the shtick of talking to Dana while he was in a fight, that started in earnest in the Michael Johnson fight, it's because he couldn't finish guys and be completely positionally dominant. He didn't want to risk. So he could maintain complete control and talk, which gave him some notoriety. It made him a bit of a character. It made him seem a lot more dominant than what he was, because he wasn't getting finishes. And then Michael Johnson, who, isn't famous for sticking in the fight when it gets tough, completely worn out, completely out of position, and Khabib was able to get that arm crank behind his back, and yeah, he had to tap to that for sure. And in Khabib's last fight was his best fight. It was also the best guy he ever had to fight. That's, to me, what's sad. Now, I don't know if y'all have seen, I'm not sure why I'm saying y'all, that's not what I normally say. Must be the location. But what was I saying? I'm trying to grab a picture. Oh, yes. Talking of Khabib. Let me bring this up. There we go. There's a photo of the Beavers in the background there. And I'm just wondering, because Khabib was always reputed to walk around at about 210. That's what Daniel Cormier let that slip one time. And you could tell it was an accident, because then he tried to play it off like that wasn't true. But, yeah, if you see the picture on the screen here at the checkpoint for Islam, I mean, Khabib is getting pretty big. So to me, that says he was really, really looking to get out of fighting. And good for him. He went out on top, was able to, do all the things he said he wanted to do, basically. He didn't ever have to, he didn't have to have a long reign. He didn't have to fight different challenges. He fought the guys he wanted to fight. He implemented the Chael Sonnen game plan better than anybody. You get in, you get out, and, take as little damage as possible. So I would disagree with you that Khabib was more about damage. He had better ground and pound than Chael had, but they're very similar fighters in that it was almost all about position and holding the guy down, wearing him down. So, John Wayne says, I feel the aura of Dagestani fighters get their opponents too much every time. Makhachev would level change, Green would get shook. Yeah, how do you think the future opponents of Makhachev can fix this? That's a great question. Definitely, Islam is riding Khabib's coattails, and it's understandable. But yeah, I think he gets credit, so people almost feel like they're fighting Khabib when they're fighting Makhachev. Look, his last several fights where he's been his most dominant, he was fighting guys that were the best for him, and he was the worst for them matchup-wise. So you're going to see a more dominant outcome. And so I think we can't just judge it purely on, well, look, he's completely dominating these guys. Well, if Damian Maia in his prime was fighting guys outside of the top 25, he would have had a sub every single time. When he went through a stretch when he was having a difficult time getting guys into different positions. Well, that's what happens when you fight guys who are not only at the top of the division, but also a decent matchup against you. So, I think Oliveira isn't going to he's going to welcome the grappling. Gaethje, I don't know. Khabib definitely got in Gaethje's head. I think Gaethje would have been much better off if he was managed by somebody else. Gaethje is not. It's best when somebody else does the thinking for Gaethje, and Trevor Whitman basically says as much. And Gaethje did way too much thinking in that fight against Khabib, though he came pretty close to seriously compromising the Biebs with the leg kicks. So, there you go. Yes, question. I will be doing a video breakdown. Hold on here. All right. Ink says, back I joined late. Apologies if you already covered this. He's pleasantly surprised by Islam. He appears to be more aggressive than Khabib, at least early in the fights. He's growing on me. Yeah, we're pretty much of a mind there that he's doing well. The one caveat is he's facing even lower competition than Khabib did at this stage. But again, that's not all Islam's fault. And he's making hay while the sun shines. So you give him a mediocre opponent or a guy who's really not great against a grappler, he comes out strong and he does the job. So he's growing on me too, for sure. But he also isn't afraid of standing and striking. He's got those skills. It's more of a discipline that he doesn't use them at this point. Verity Vod says it's not Islam's fault that Dariush got hurt or that nobody in the top 10 will step up to fight. At some point in his career, should move on. When he becomes champ, he will clean up the division. Well, that's what Khabib said, but Khabib didn't. Khabib got the championship, fought the few fights he wanted to fight, and then skated. And to me, you need to do the dirty work before you get the championship. And then you just fight whoever's number one. So, but you're absolutely right. It's not Islam's fault that Dariush got hurt. But, remember, Islam used to pull out a lot, too. He pulled out of 3 or 4 fights in the last few years. That was very much that Team Khabib, that if they weren't 100%, they'd pull out. So the fact that that's happened back to him a few times is fine. And it's just part of the fight game, particularly right now, as things are winding down with the pandemic. You should see less of those late-minute changes, although with this one, it was because of an injury. Colby versus Mozvidal versus Hazmat versus Gilbert Burns. The winners face each other, interim welterweight belt, while Kamaru heals up after hand surgery. Hey, that would be great. I think Hazmat is, I think he has the potential to be something special as well. I mean, clearly, right? He's had the success he has. And, in fact, I believe one of the reasons Khabib retired when he did was Hazmat. Chimaev is just too much of a shit talker. And he was already going at Khabib and talking about his soft schedule and how he never gets finishes and things like that. One's from Chechnya, Khabib's from Dagestan. You'd think they'd be fast friends, but Chimaev is not a follower. In Khabib's circle, he's the leader. Everybody else is one step behind. And Chimaev was clearly not going to be that guy, talking about how Khabib would fight once every 16 months. I'm fighting twice in a week. He was, if Khabib was contemporary with Chimaev, there's going to be comparisons, as they were. They called Chimaev, Khabib 2.0, and it was Chimaev who said, that's not, I do more than Khabib does. So, yeah, I think Chimaev is a real wild card for sure. We'll have to see how he develops. Apparently, Jones revealed this week his fiance left him. How do you think this will impact Jones? Did he have her hostage this whole time? No. Well, look, anybody who still calls somebody their fiance and it's over 8 years, that's an effed up situation. Either the woman is delusional or the man is incredibly manipulative. Most likely in this situation, it's a combination of the two. It was unhealthy all the way around. Get her out of there, move on, because it was completely clear that John was living exactly the way he wanted to. So what was in it for her? I guess other than the kids, the 3 to 4 kids, however many he has. Okay. Drew Loring said, did the UFC ask me to stop body language videos because they were so dope? No, actually, it was the CIA. They came to me and suggested that I stop giving away all the secrets. It was a breach of my contract with them. Yeah, I missed the UFC 223 days. I really wish Tony didn't fall over the wire. I feel like both Tony and Khabib's career has a hole in it without fighting each other. Well, to me, it's 209 because that was right 209. Yeah, that was the fight card where they were both perfectly healthy, and Khabib just couldn't make weight, and so he pulled out. And there was a whole story behind that. And I've actually had one guy contact me who lives in Vegas and had some inside information, supposedly, that they didn't contact the UFC, which that is confirmed. That's true. They already went to the wrong hospital, which was across the town. They immediately got Khabib pumped up on fluids and everything before he was even checked. So there was no way he could make weight the next day. He didn't want the fight then. And we'll never know what would have happened. But the one thing I won't stand for are the people. We get this from Donkerson, where he says, well, we never needed to see Tony versus Khabib because we saw Tony in his last few fights. Well, that's asinine. Tony was in Khabib's head. At least a little. He could make Khabib react, and nobody else could do that. Not even Conor. So you don't know how it was going to play out. So yeah, it's sad. It's probably the one that it was probably the one that got away that hurts us all the most. Brian Diff says he was thinking about the manufactured drama while watching the countdown. Yeah, I wonder how much of it is manufactured. Yes, and they're saying that the rivalry started because somebody was jealous, and I don't know. We'll definitely get into that, and I will be doing a video on that. So we'll get to a few more questions here, and then wrap her up. Yes, Huey says, Uncle Chael always says position over submission. Yeah, that's it. And when you are a guy on a mission and you have zero room for error, it makes sense to play it safe. It does. You don't then get to be called the GOAT if you have a short career against a limited list of opponents and almost all but one of your fights were very cautious. You don't get the same credit that an Anderson Silva does for going out there and just fighting dudes. That doesn't mean that you're not in the discussion. D-Rest. Oh, hey, brother. The MMA holes support Opacathosaurus. Thanks, brother. I appreciate that. Good to hear from you guys. Yeah. Love the content. What the hell is MMA hole? LOL. All right. So, getting back to a couple of the fights, the highlighted fights, was kind of circling back around. And if you have any more questions, write those down, and we'll get to them. We got a few more minutes to wrap this up. But I did want to touch on the fourth fight of the night. We'll kind of work our way through real quick. Terence Mckenney. Dude's now 2-0 in the UFC. 2 finishes, 2 early finishes. What was it? He has the fastest knockout in the division in his first fight. He gets the rear naked choke in the first round in this fight. And against a guy in Zaim who, very accomplished, again, sort of in this Tom Duquesnoy mold of a guy who has all these accolades in French kickboxing, which is a little bit more of an exhibition sport. It's from what I can tell, it's not quite point fighting, but it's more along those lines than just straight ahead, brutal combat sport. And did not relish the dirty parts of the fight, did not relish the grit and tenacity, and I just love Mckenney's mindset. Whereas Zaim seemed to have the mentality that fighting was a theory, and you have all these theories, and then you try to apply them. To me, Mckenney is a guy who is practicing. He's applying an actual. The way he practices is the way he fights, and those guys are dangerous. Again, that goes back to Khabib. You know, you practice the way you fight. And we see that with Sean Strickland. You know, the guys that are able to pull that off. Now, it's risky depending on your style because it can be a lot more damaging in the practice sessions. And it's easier to do with wrestling. But I think Terence Mckenney has a really big upside. And for a 27-year-old guy, just 2 fights in the UFC, super upside. We talked a little bit about Josiani Nunez. She was fighting a bit of a, questionable opponent. It was at 145, and how crazy that Nunez is 5'2", and she's in there against a giant gal from Hong Kong. But Nunez is exciting. Hopefully she goes back to 135. She has those crazy gorilla arms for being 5'2" and having a 67-inch reach. It's absolutely crazy. And she uses it to create, and she has no neck. So that's going to make her harder to knock out. When you have a rock-solid head like that, it's the snapping of the neck back so often that causes the concussive. It's the reverberation of the brain that will completely put your lights out. So I think she's a dark horse at 135. She's exciting. And, she's got a winning record. And recently we've not seen a lot of the gal fights where you had real contenders or real prospects and they had winning records and all that kind of stuff. So she's just damn fun. Talked a little bit about in the sixth fight, Rongju versus Ignacio Bahamandes. I love this dude. I love Bahamandes. The guy is just chock full of talent, and he's clearly well-rounded, and he's starting to put it together. He seemed to be taking pictures and being a little bit of a, maybe the moment was awfully big for him. It was almost more like he was imagining himself in a movie when he was fighting on the Contender Series, because he was doing a lot of technical things and pulling off some pretty amazing moves, but he wasn't sitting down on his punches, and he definitely wasn't being overly aggressive. Not in a doing damage sort of way, more of a touch, working out the techniques, and just trying to have mastery. Like it's more of an exhibition than an actual fight. And we saw a little bit of that in his first fight in the UFC. The one he lost, the split decision. I'm forgetting who he fought, but it was a split decision. And but in this fight, he bore down more. I don't know if it's maturity or just having a fight under his belt, under the big lights. I think the ceiling is high for this guy. He's tall. I can't think of anybody since James Vick that is actually as rangy and tall as Bahamandes is. But unlike Vick, the guy has good footwork, keeps his chin tucked most of the time, extremely dynamic, and to be that large for the division and still faster than Rongju was, to me, it's amazing. He's definitely on the list of fighters that I'm watching and excited to see where they go. Probably the best fight of the night was the next fight. It was the opener of the main card, Armin Petrosian versus Gregory Rodriguez, Superman versus the RoboCop, and I always liked Rodriguez. Even him getting knocked out, it was in Dana White's Contender Series. There was something about him that he had drive, that he had a little bit of a spark to him. And Armin Petrosian, the dude has the credibility. He had something like 90, 91 kickboxing fights, but he was 70-21. I actually wrote that down. He was 70-21, which I think is a good sign, because when you're at a developmental level, you should be losing sometimes. It's the guys who at a developmental level have no losses that I would start to question if they're actually pushing themselves hard enough. And Petrosian was certainly pushed hard in this fight. He got everything he could handle and then some. And when he got kicked in the nose, I believe it was the shin from Rodriguez, I thought it was nigh on finished. But Rodriguez ended up deciding to grapple in that moment and take advantage to be able to get some positions. And Petrosian, he found his bearings again, and he came out like a cat on fire as soon as he was able to stand up. And that's a hell of a trait to have. I thought Rodriguez won the decision. It ended up being a split decision, but it's one of those fights that truly was so close it could go either way. And I thought, let me know what you guys think, but I thought Petrosian, particularly in the stand-up, and even the way he handled the grappling to get back up, he reminds me a little bit of Gegard Mousasi. A little bit of that same flow, technical, in the most literal sense, but not as smooth. Like Anderson Silva was always smooth, and Gegard, he was always very efficient, but it was a little rougher. And kind of see that. It's more like a blue-collar proficiency. Very impressive. I think he's got a tremendous upside. I still like Gregory Rodriguez. He needs work on game planning. If he could have implemented grappling more sporadically throughout the whole fight rather than going to it just at the end of rounds or when he was in a little bit of a tough spot, I think it would keep his opponent guessing. But right now, my guess is it's ego. This guy's coming forward at me. I'm going to face the challenge head on, which I respect. But there does come a point where you have to develop. We saw that in Michael Bisping's career, speaking of 185-pounders, where he finally started to get truly smart and not be so egotistical, was the Anderson Silva fight. Because he was fighting Anderson the way he always fought. He used footwork. He wasn't an idiot. He had good defense. But he fought Anderson Silva in the first round and a half, 2 rounds. Was it the third round where he got knocked down at the very end? And he was taking the challenge straight on. He was fighting Anderson, if you want to say, on his own terms, because Bisping believed he was more of a badass striker than Silva. He did get knocked out, but it was after the bell. Comes back, and ever since that fight, it was like he didn't care. In the last 2 rounds, he was able to eke out a decision win. It's like he left some of his ego behind and didn't have to answer every challenge directly. You can be a little bit subtle about things, a little bit calculated. Ended up getting his opportunity against Rockhold, and it was magical moment. Sparked the guy, and I think part of it was he was willing to fight that fight and win on decision. So since he wasn't pressing chin against chin, the knockout came more easily. And who knows if Rodriguez will mature to that point or not. The 8th fight of the night, or 4th from the top, Armin Cerukian versus Joel Alvarez. We talked about this a little bit. This guy's a legitimate player in the division. And he's going to be far too polite to Makhachev like he was in the interview afterwards, saying, well, maybe after he's champ, I'll get another shot at him. But to me, not next, because Makhachev just fought him not too long ago. But he's a serious contender in the division for sure. And to me, what was most impressive is that he was able, we were talking earlier about the balance between position and submission, the risk and the reward. Do you maintain control or do you go for finishes? And this guy was able to balance both very early in his career. And Joel Alvarez, very tricky on the ground. We've definitely seen that. And he tried to throw up some submissions. I think, hindsight, Alvarez would have been better served to just do whatever he could to get up. But I don't know that there was really anything he was going to be able to do. Very impressive. We'll have to see how he gets matched up next. Him being Alvarez. Because at this point, the guy, I don't want to see them come head to head, but Mateusz Gamrot, he might be the most exciting prospect at 155 pounds right now. Again, another reason that it's so sad and disappointing that Khabib took his ball and went home, just coming into the prime of his career. Because in the top 10, you now have 9, Gillespie, 12, Gamrot, 13, Cerukian, all wrestlers that are good strikers as well. And I guess he left the heavy lifting for Islam to take care of if he ends up getting the title belt. I guess at this point, it almost doesn't matter who wins the belt. It's going to be a hard thing to hang on to, though my suspicion or my belief is that Oliveira holds on to it for quite a while. Okay. Yes, Cottonhead says Izzy's too safe in that sense, going back to a comment about how he fought Blachowicz. And that's true, he is, but he has advantages with his body type, and there are disadvantages, and that's that he can't handle taking a lot of big strikes. And I don't even mean his chin, just his body. If he took too many blows or if he was under somebody else's control for too long, basically the same thing's true for Conor McGregor, but he's too egotistical, where Izzy, he doesn't mind winning a boring fight. And then he's so good at shaping their narrative, by the time his next fight comes up, you forgot that the last one was kind of a disappointment. Because there's always a chance he's going to put on an amazing performance, and you wouldn't want to miss it. Timothy Steiner says, I guarantee a finish in the Glover-Yuri Prochazka fight. Won't go the distance. Bet the house. Yeah, but who are you picking? That's the question. And D-Resk asks about 145 pounds. I've got the breakdown of, who is right. Well, clearly Volkanovski is firmly in position of the division. Eventually we're going to get the part 3 with Holloway. But I thought for a long time the Volkanovski, even before the Chad Mendes fight, I thought he was possibly the class of the division, that would be a style that might be difficult for Holloway. And if Holloway can't beat him, going to be tough. Although I will say the Yair Rodriguez-Holloway fight was a revelation. I had no clue that Yair had that kind of dog in him. For a guy to be so proficient and to be so intent on getting things technically right and being showy with your striking, and also have all the guts and the grit in the world, I won't discount Yair's chances against anybody anymore. That was, to me, in fact, I'll put it out at some point maybe, that was the fight that I gave Fight of the Year for 2021, the Yair Rodriguez versus Max Holloway fight. The highest level fighting for nearly the highest stakes, and for both men to have to dig that deep, it was very impressive. I'm not sure why the Korean Zombie still ranked quite so high, other than he's getting a title shot, so he's got to be. The division has a lot of up-and-comers as well. We'll have to see if Zabit comes back. He's no longer in the rankings. I don't know what the deal is with him, if it's managerial or something else. But for me, the Prince of Divisions is 135 pounds. It's top to bottom. It's crazy, crazy deep. When you have Rafael Asuncao as the number 15 guy in the division, that's crazy. And Peter Yan may be the best fighter in the whole UFC. It's crazy. A couple more questions. Antigone 81 says, I really miss your psychological breakdowns. We'll get ready because there will be more coming. Talked about that in the beginning. Got a situation, moved temporarily, so I'm back in the land of society, which is kind of neat. And so, yeah, definitely be some videos coming out. Okay. Oh, AMS Moments asks if we think Green having to lose 40 pounds in 10 days had anything to do with the loss. Yeah, but that's what he signed up for. He agreed to the fight. And you can't take away credit from Islam. As I said at the very beginning, the dude fought the person that was put in front of him, and he fought him perfectly. Flawless. There was no laying on him for a round or 2 rounds just to wear him down. He pushed forward and he dominated. Very impressive. Ink asks, does Kayla Harrison want to sign with the UFC? I think she's built enough hype to get Mike Chandler money. Thoughts? Wow, it's tough to give up that easy $1 million prize every year. And now the World Series of Fighting, or whatever they're called, they put themselves in a spot where they can't get rid of the division, and she's their biggest star, I think, or moves the needle the most. But they're horrible fights. There's nobody for her to fight at that weight. I understand she's talking about coming down to 145 pounds, but there's almost nobody for her to fight at that weight. And that would be in the UFC. I don't know what's going on with Germaine Durandamy. It was intimated that she had an announcement to make at one point, but she hasn't. You've got some gals that can go up. Amanda Nunes is still the champ there, so that would be a fight, but that certainly lost a lot of luster when somebody finally just stood up to Amanda and, didn't go well for her. It's not that she can't come back and win, but I think Amanda's got one foot out of the game anyways. And God bless her. She was dominant. She became double champ. She took on all the challenges. Made short work of a lot of pretty good fighters. She's married. She's, started her own gym. She didn't do that to make herself better, in my opinion. She did that as a way to have something to do when she's done fighting. So, can't imagine she had any beef with anybody at AT&T or wasn't getting enough time. She got all the time. It seems like she was able to get all the time she needed. She was top priority at the gym. So I don't know who Kayla Harrison would necessarily fight in the UFC. Juliana Pena would, I'm sure, be willing to go up to 145. She was willing to fight Amanda at 145 when she was trying to get the fight. So I guess there's 2 ways for Harrison to play it. Kind of the way Chandler did, where he teased at one point that he might go, but then re-signed with Bellator. I think there's more upside financially for Harrison to come to the UFC, but that's potential. The way UFC contracts are written, if you don't win, if you don't perform, you don't end up making that much money. But if you win and you draw eyeballs, you're getting paid more than any other athlete. The top paid UFC fighter gets paid more than way more than LeBron James, way more than Matt Stafford. But that's a rare combination. Although I think Kayla Harrison, she could capture some of that Ronda Rousey magic, because she's not just a great judoka and an already accomplished MMA fighter. She's also better on the mic. You know, Ronda, maybe people forget this, but she was pretty horrible on the mic. And a bad attitude. People wanted to be her fan, a fan of hers, and she made it difficult with just the way she would behave sometimes. Certainly, as soon as she lost the first time, she was just not gracious or self-reflective or any of the things that you want in a fighter if you're going to really support them and be a fan. So I think Harrison probably sticks around another year at the World Series of Fighting. Or no, they changed it, the Fighters League. So get that easy million and then see if there's something. The UFC would have to make a pretty good offer, and I don't know that they can right now. If Nunez had won, that'd be a different story. D-Rest says, Holloway was deemed the strongest chin in UFC history. Yeah, well, got to be pretty close. Definitely that Poirier fight, when they fought for the was it the interim fight? I believe it was, at 155. Very impressive. And what was frustrating to me is that I think if Max were to have that fight again, he would win pretty handily. You could see him making all these adjustments to his new size and the size of the opponent, and he was getting stronger. He was having more moments, and they had their back and forth. But I felt like that's a fight. If it would have went 7 rounds, you might have seen a finish, but it wouldn't have been Max going out, because as D-Rest says, Max has about the best damn chin you're ever going to see. Don't forget that Aldo landed in both fights some pretty square shots early in those fights, and just nothing, just no reaction. It's very impressive. Doer Brick says Holloway's taken a lot of shots to the head. Yep, that's true. That's one of the things. And that was a story for a little while where people thought he was slurring his speech during an interview, and they pulled him from the fights. But who knows what that was? It might have been dehydration. It might have been any number of things. I'm still, who knows? He would have been a much better fight for Khabib than Al Iaquinta. And Iaquinta, didn't make an idiot of himself. Al was never really a top 10 guy, but that fight put him in the top 15. And he got the win over Kevin Lee, though he did not actually win that fight. The count metrics were way off on that fight. But because he won the last 2 rounds so soundly, nobody ever complains about that. So it would have been a very interesting fight, because the only other guy to really get a reaction out of Khabib, other than Tony, was Max Holloway. Because Khabib didn't love a lot of the things Max was saying. And it's not like Max was ever rude. He just wasn't sycophantic. D-Rest says, yeah, Holloway never knocked down, never KO'd. Hope I reach out to Mose and come on the show. Yeah, we talked about it at one point, and now I'm getting back into the role with things. That could be an option. There was talk of puppets, so be on the lookout for something crazy. All right, brothers and sisters. We've gone a little more than 90 minutes, and I appreciate it. Appreciate everybody showing up. The support from D-Rest. Thanks for the cash, brother. We will be back here next Sunday at 11 a.m. Western Time, 1 Pacific Time, 7 p.m. London Time. And on top of that, there should be at least one episode out this week, and I'm hoping for 2, based on the Colby and Mozvidal interviews and face-offs. Thanks, guys. Thanks, D-Rest, Brian, Earl, Inc., everybody else, the gentlemen of the chat.
Otherwise, we would be cows in a field. There is some sort of a harmony. It is the harmony of overwhelming and collective murder. It is not that I hate it. I love it. I love it very much. But I love it against my better judgment.